Ed, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. For the audience, Ed is part of the Working Class Audio Mastermind group. It's kind of like a peer accountability group. And I initially saw your name associated with the Facebook Atmos group. Mm-hmm. And then one thing led to another. And we've gotten to know each other over the course of this last year, I think.
Just about, yeah.
Just about. So let's do the state of where things are at now, where you're at, what you're doing, and then we'll go back to the beginning and capture the origin story part of it. What do you consider yourself, and where are you at, and what are you doing?
Well, people throw around producer, engineer pretty liberally. Most of the time I'm hired as a producer and kind of take that role in a fairly traditional way, actually working with the artist in pre-production, working on songs, making sure the arrangements are right so that when we actually do get to the studio, we can work quickly and we're not just sort of searching around for stuff. But in the course of that, I also do quite a bit of work where I'm the engineer working for a producer. Either way, I'm perfectly happy and don't have a whole lot of ego in things, so I don't mind sharing the captain's chair. A lot of the projects that I work on are Americana or roots music these days. It's not 100%. I did do a couple jazz records this year, which was a little bit outside of my normal, but that's what people come looking for me to do, it seems. And most of it's independent. Rarely do anything that is label funded or driven by the A&R at a label. So it's a lot of word of mouth. Folks who've heard my work or have heard about working with me come and seek me out. And that said, there are artists who I find really compelling, and I'll go chase them down and try to wrestle them to the ground and put a microphone in front of them.
I'm going to come back around and ask you about that in more detail later. Your studio is located at Lemon Tree, which is in Highland Park in Los Angeles, correct?
That's right.
And that's where you're talking to us from now?
Yeah, I'm here. I've been here for about 5 years, since shortly after they opened. In that time, it's PMC, speakers, and me are kind of the only tenants left from that first group. So I've seen a lot of turnover and met a lot of great folks working here. There are 14 rooms, 12 are studios, like producers' rooms, kind of similar to what you see here. And then there's a shared tracking room, which is modest in size. It's maybe 450, 500 square feet. So I can fit 4 players in there pretty comfortably. And then the entire place is wired together with Dante. So any room could be a control room, any room can be an ISO booth, which came in really handy during the lockdown. So I could have singers in separate rooms spewing droplets everywhere, and nobody had to be, we were extremely socially distanced.
Yeah.
The tracking room here, again, while it's modest in size, is my favorite drum room in LA. I did a record last year at East West and came back over here and retracked drums for a few of the songs. Just a very natural sounding room. Sounds like a person playing a drum kit, not a cannon shot. So it's been good to work here. And we've got a great community now. Everybody does something a little bit different, but seemingly everybody's really, really good at what they do. Mm-hmm. So it's for me, even as a teenager, I always wanted to be kind of the worst player on the bandstand so I could learn as much as possible. And I find that tradition continues anyway, because the folks who work here are just so sharp and so good at what they do. It's good to be able to soak it up or pick their brains and, keep learning and becoming better at what I do.
Yeah, and former WCA guest Jay Clark is down the hall from you, right?
Yeah, Jay's a great dude and an amazing resource. I probably owe him many hundreds of hours of tech support payments.
He's the guy you call.
He's the first call because he knows his stuff inside and out.
Let's talk about where you grew up and what your world was like growing up as it pertained to music or technology and the people around you who influenced you.
I was born just outside of Philadelphia, which is where my sort of extended family's from. But as a kid, we moved around quite a bit every 2-3 years. So I ended up in Delaware for a minute and then lived in Michigan a few times, lived in Iowa, back to Michigan, back to Pennsylvania, back to Michigan, out to California, and I've been here for a couple decades now. So as a kid, I got to experience East Coast and Midwest living, and then, just finished the trifecta when I moved to the West Coast. So got to have a chance to understand those little variations of American culture. Mm-hmm. And as far as music, I didn't come from a very musical family, but my mom tells a story about when I was 2 years old, they had a Yamaha home organ store at the mall, because there was actually, I guess, a market for people to just buy home organs at the time. Mm-hmm. And I would dance in front of the store where the guy was demonstrating the organ until she dragged me away, and I would, bawl my eyes out and try to go back. So music had a pretty early grip on me somehow. And as a kid, I eventually, in, I guess, 4th or 5th grade, whenever they start giving you band instruments in elementary school, I really wanted to play the drums and got vetoed, and my parents got me a trumpet. So I started there, and we always had a piano in the house. When I was 9, I won a composition contest, like a citywide composition contest. I think it was sponsored by the PTA. And so even then I was putting notes on paper, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And I still have a copy of that piece, and I clearly didn't know what I was doing, because it sounds like a 9-year-old wrote it. But I had the bug. And so into the early teen years, started playing guitar and playing in bands. But the real turning point, I think, personally for me, was when I was 14 or 15, I made my first record. And it was my first time in a studio, small, I think it was 8-track analog. And I became fascinated by what the guys on the other side of the glass were doing, to the point where I was blowing takes because I was watching what knobs they were turning. And that was it. I had I saved up my pennies and bought a Fostex 4-track cassette recorder, the X15, and started making recordings down my mom and dad's basement that were, as horrible as you can imagine they would be, but learning every step of the way about how sounds kind of work together. Studied classical guitar at college for a couple of years, but college didn't really sit well with me. But while I was there, taking composition courses and arranging, this was in the not earliest days of MIDI, but it was still kind of a new thing. And one of our professors, one of the tasks we had to complete was to get an arrangement from paper into MIDI and then record that. So they had an Atari, I don't even remember what model, Atari computer with a Casio CZ1000 or CZ100 keyboard. And all my classmates hired me to do their work because I was the only one who was really interested in fooling around with the computer. So that started me down the road of working with computers and music, even though at the time it was just MIDI sequencing. There was no audio capture. So when that sort of, and then progressed to tracks and an early version of Cubase. And as soon as audio began to become integrated into those sequencers, like the modern DAW, DAW, the very early versions of those, I took to it really quickly. And even though I was still working on tape a lot of time, we were using the computer to really create the basis for tracks, or, using samples in the ways that everybody did back then, just stealing stuff off records. But all the while, even though the technology intrigued me and the studio workflow was really compelling to me, I was still playing and still performing and doing some touring. I did an enormous number of television commercial music beds. They weren't really jingles. They were more like a music bed into my mid-20s. And took a brief period off and went and worked for my father-in-law, which was a whole other adventure. But quickly came back to music and founded a mobile recording company. And the inspiration for the mobile recording company was Tom Petty.
Really?
On September 26, 2006 or 2007, went to see him at the Hollywood Bowl. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I had like this really cool phone. It was a Motorola Razr.
I remember.
I could actually kind of send an email with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I left that show thinking, a great show. Stevie Nicks and Jeff Lynne showed up. It was an awesome night. But I left there thinking, how cool would it be if I had a recording of that show on my phone? And so I started exploring how you could record a live event and transmit it to a mobile phone. This is pre-iPhone, pre-smartphone. And I quickly figured out that it wasn't practical for a number of reasons. One was, the biggest being that at the data charges at the time, it would have cost you like $1,000 to download 100 megabytes.
Yeah.
So I looked for other avenues to rapidly deliver recordings to audience members. And Live Nation at the time had a division where they were burning CDs after a show. Mm-hmm. But it would take 45 minutes to sometimes 90 minutes. And you know what people don't want to do after a concert's over?
Stay.
Wait around. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I started looking into other ways we could rapidly deliver it, and developed a software hardware system that could burn thousands of USB drives in like 3 minutes. So we could record a show, upload it into the burner machine, and have them at the merch table within 5 or 6 minutes. So it became a practical way to do that. And then as that technology developed, we found a way where we didn't even burn it on site. We had a little software key that when you plugged it into your computer, it went to the server, validated that they were talking to each other and you're okay to have this content. And then it would open up and allow the user through a little mini web portal to be able to download MP3s of the show that they had attended, plus video messages from the band members. That's when I started working with labels, and we would bundle the latest album with the live music sale so that they were getting SoundScan numbers with this additional merch item that they were selling on the road. And that's the point where I learned all about publishing, because all of a sudden I was making a new live album every night, sometimes with 5 or 6 crews on the road, and having to clear all of that stuff and make sure that everybody got paid the right way. So that company lasted for the challenge that we faced a bunch of challenges. So I'm talking really fast. If you want to jump in and slow me down, let me know.
This is interesting to me.
So in 2006 or 2007, I would go into meet with, A&R folks or folks from the label and say, hey, here's a way that we can make your artist money, and we can bundle it with your studio album, so you're making money too. And the question I got asked every time was, well, what's your data security protocol? And it stunned me, because I thought, well, there isn't one, because it's an MP3. You can just share it. You guys know all about that. So then I finally had an insight, and I would respond and say, we use the exact same security protocol that you use on your CDs, which is none. But that was an answer that satisfied them enough that we were able to work together. So that was the first hurdle to get the business going. But I also started the business right on the cusp of the 2008 financial crisis. Mm-hmm. So funding for startups dried up pretty quick. And so we had trouble getting investor interest in the way that we had kind of hoped to scale things up to where we, do the hockey stick and, okay, now we're as valuable as Google. So that was a business challenge. The other challenge was going out and talking to artists about immediately releasing a live performance scared the hell out of a lot of them. Even though we told them, by encore, if you give us the thumbs down, nobody ever hears this. That wasn't enough for them to feel like I'm comfortable having this performance out into the world as a recording. It's one thing when things, a bad note or something kind of, flub just ephemerally passes by in the middle of a concert. Mm-hmm. It's another when it's memorialized and you can listen to it over and over again. So with those challenges, it was a harder slog than I at first thought it would be because I was so excited about this idea. That mobile recording company, we had an office in LA, an office in the UK. We were very busy for 5 or 6 years. And then towards, somewhere around 2012 or 2013, we had kind of worked with the pool of artists that were willing to work with us. Mm-hmm. I had begun to develop phone apps that we could send things to instead of flash drives. So that way we'd have no cost of goods. But the interest in what we were doing just seemed to fizzle out. And so simultaneously with that, some of the artists that I'd been working with out on tour started to ask me if I could do studio work for them too. So I sort of slowly transitioned into just doing freelance studio work, built a small room outside of my house and was there for a few years, but quickly outgrew it and eventually wound up here at Lemon Tree.
Were you ever focused on being one thing or another, being either a producer, an engineer, or a rock star? Or were you just experimenting in all different areas and just seeing where life took you?
That's a really good question. Because if I had a time machine, I'd go back and do it different. Because I was sort of sprawling out and trying to do all of it at once, be a performer. I was more of a sideman than a star for sure, but still really enjoy playing behind people. But also trying to get TV commercial gigs as a composer, and at the time I would produce anybody. If they had a few bucks, I'd be glad to make a recording with them. So I was doing all kinds of different, hip hop and metal and alternative stuff, but always came back to roots music somehow. That always grabbed me. And that kind of goes back to me living in Iowa as a kid. First concert I ever went to was Loretta Lynn. First time I heard a steel guitar, I was 5 years old. I remember the moment. We lived on a dirt road out in the sticks. So I was, you kind of hit the nail on the head, is that I was always doing all this different stuff. And it took me until maybe 12, 15 years ago to start focusing really on working solely as a producer and engineer as my main sort of, here's what I do for my living. Mm-hmm. I still somehow find myself doing lots of other things. But if I had that time machine, I think I would have focused on that a lot sooner, because that's really where I get a lot of it's just personally rewarding to me to help other people make art. And that's what I get to sit around and do all day. It's great. But I wish I'd figured it out a little earlier.
You said you primarily work with independent artists. You live in Los Angeles, so is there a pressure or a feeling you have, like, to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, of trying to get major label work? Or do you find it more rewarding and a more enjoyable experience, in general, just to work with independent artists?
As a teenager, an impressionable teenager, I was really drawn to the sort of punk rock DIY ideal, the approach to things more than the music itself, even though there's some really exciting punk rock stuff in the late 80s that was cool. But just that sense of independence. And I think that my high school guidance counselor, I don't even know if they still have those, but my high school guidance counselor said, like, well, you bristle at authority. And so kind of anytime anybody's telling me what to do, I don't respond well. So having a label dictate what I could do never sat well with me when I did bounce into it. And even that was small independent labels. Mm-hmm. So I kept things fairly independent, or worked in that ecosphere up until I was doing the live recording stuff. And that's where I started working with major labels, like I described before, or artists who had been on major labels and were still sort of working at that level with, the expectations from their management, from their booking agent. And quickly, began butting heads with stuff like decisions that were made by committee or were driven by commerce, not art. And it led me back to the indie world pretty quick, like most large cities, while there may be an industry home here, there's an awful lot of stuff bubbling beneath the surface that's really cool. There's no pressure, and don't get me wrong. If the right project came along, I'd be glad to work with an artist, and I can collaborate with a label. I don't have to, just give them the finger and run away. But it'd have to be the right project that I really, an artist I really wanted to work with, and in that case, then I'd be glad to do it. And when you do, and let's, the economic realities. Indie artists are generally broke or close to it. Working with them, I know that, hey, we're not going to, maybe we're not going to go into the studio for 2 weeks straight, knock this all out, have it done, because they just don't have the budget for that. So we might have to do 2 days here, 2 days in a couple months, and make it work for their realities, because they're working day jobs or they're out on the road, and I need to have patience to do that. So there are trade-offs.
One of the trade-offs that I really like is the fact that you just get paid faster.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The 30, 45, 90-day invoice thing doesn't happen.
I did some additional mixes for a client yesterday, sent the invoice, and by the end of the day, he had paid it. And every time that happens, I just have a moment of appreciation for the independent artist. And, I give him a break for sure on the price, because that's just a part of that. But there's a convenience there of just getting paid really fast. In terms of making it work for those artists that are broke, do you have any strategies that you use to try to make it all work for you and them?
Yeah, and one of them I touched on a little bit is pre-production. Let's go, rehearsal is cheap. Let's go and rehearse the hell out of things, so that, again, you don't have a bass player who's fumbling to figure out what his part is when we're trying to get actual takes. And and they have to rehearse anyway. They're going out and they're hopping in the van and going out for 2 weeks or whatever. They need, it's time well spent. It's not just like they're spinning their wheels to make a record. That's sort of killing two birds. So that helps a lot. The other thing that happens too is I'll work with them on what are other ways that I can get paid on the back end, and whether it's I do revenue share on publishing money, or, hey, when you guys are out on the road and your merch sales go real well, then not that I'm taking it's not like a 360 deal where I'm taking their merch money, but I'm just giving them revenue avenues. Like, here's one way that you guys can pay me without just give me your bartending tips. Is we can make this record now. You go out on the road, start selling it, then pay me later. So I'm almost financing it, right? But the important thing for me is I never want them to feel like I'm staring at the clock trying to run it up just to get paid. I want to make sure that they know every minute that I spend is valuable for them, so that whatever pennies and dollars they can pay, they know they're getting the most out of it they possibly can. And that's hopefully something that I'm able to convey before we even start working.
Do you ever try to, there's some of these solutions to allow people to finance, not necessarily through credit cards. I've seen some of these methods out there that you can get paid now and the band can pay it off. Is that something that you've ever considered?
There's a couple outfits, and I haven't followed up on this recently. I learned about this sort of thing, and I'm not talking about crowdfunding. That's a separate revenue source. Mm-hmm. But there's mailbox money companies where they will take a percentage or total ownership of somebody's catalog rights for a huge advance. And then they keep paying a percentage of that to the artist, but it's sort of a way for the artist to fund their latest project. I think there's some giving up your publishing rights should not be taken lightly. You should not rush into that decision.
Right.
But I know that there, probably like 8-10 years ago, there were a couple companies that were trying to find ways to leverage catalogs as an asset even if they took ownership for 10 years or something, and then it reverted back to the artist. So I did do a couple of tours that were funded that way. I haven't seen any practical solutions like that for indie artists because they just don't have the collateral or they don't have mailbox money coming in from previous hits that makes it interesting to an investor, unless there's a rich uncle or, some sort of family relationship that allows them to do that.
Let's say you're going to record a band and you live in an area that's got some great studios. You mentioned East West and, Sunset Sound's there. And I mean, it's Los Angeles. There's a million studios. Nothing more to say there. However,
well, there's fewer and fewer of them, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, so you're leading me to that question. Like, are the options for an independent band coming to record with you, do you find that A, are there enough options, and B, are they affordable? And if not, like what are the different ways in which you navigate the very small budgets that these independent bands have?
There's not as many options or alternatives for mid-budget projects anymore. Like there used to be millions of studios or hundreds of studios, and not all of them were these world-class facilities. They were great rooms with modest equipment, mostly out in the Burbank or North Hollywood. And as a young struggling band, they were affordable and you could get pretty good results. Probably similar to that first studio I described going into as a kid. But those have been decimated. There's just no market for those in much of a real sense. I take that back. I know one great place right up the road. 64 Sound is just up the street here. Pierre DeRieder runs the place. It's super cool, super vibey. And it reminds me of those sort of old studios that I did a lot of work in. So you have this sort of divide. You've got these top world-class, amazing places, and then you've got I've got an AT 2035 and a laptop, and that's a studio, which is sufficient for a lot of the music that's being made now. Everything's in the box except the vocal, whether it's pop or hip hop, R&B. So those places make sense for that particular thing. It's when you got 4 sweaty people playing drums, bass, and guitar that it's hard to find a home for them. And I'm able to do that here, which is great, and not break the bank. But there's compromises too. Like I said, it's a small room. We don't have a lot of isolation in terms of where I could stick a guitar amp. So we've got to work around some things to get the results that people want, but it can be done. I also don't mind those projects when I do get to work over at Sunset or East West or NRG.
It's also a challenge too, because while you can find a place to record someone, how you price yourself on top of that is also a little bit of a juggling type situation. Can you talk about that and how you factor that or figure that out?
Well, the quick solution is if you're doing it here with me, I just have like an all-included price. You got me, you got the studio, you got any of my gear you want to use. There's no upcharge or anything like that. So that's the way that we can keep the budget under control as much as possible. If we're going to go, so for instance, if I'm going to go up to 64 Sound because I'm recording a 6 or 7 piece band that I can't fit in the room here, because I can get I think I said 4 or 5 people in there max. But if I'm going to do a bigger band, I need a bigger space. So again, that goes back to, okay, if you want to do this without overdubs, literally have the 6-piece band playing, running it down live, we can't do that here. So we're going to have to go somewhere else. So it's going to cost more. What do we do to make sure that those costs are minimized? And it goes back to that pre-production and rehearsal. We want to make sure that we get in there, we're able to knock out exactly what we want and get out with the option to come back here and do overdubs if needed. Looking at what we need to accomplish in that other space and doing it as efficiently as possible with time without ever having to feel rushed or oh crap, we have 1 hour left and we have 3 songs. We don't want to get there. So making sure we have a reasonable amount of time. Like if we're going to do a 5-song EP, you might be able to knock it out in a 10-hour day. If it's a whole album, let's be realistic. You're going to need more than that. And so that is a challenge sometimes for me, is if I go somewhere else, to pay me on top of the studio rental fee can get cost prohibitive. So we just need to be realistic about what can be accomplished. And maybe it is that we do rhythm section here one day and then we bring everybody else back and overdub their parts later just to keep it clean and get good results. That's one way to minimize the budget. But, again, my job is to help people make art. And if that's how they want to do it with everybody playing live in the room, that's great.
In terms of what you charge for yourself, do you do a sliding scale? Do you stick to a rate? How do you navigate the varying budgets, as we said, and determine, like, how am I going to get paid here? And how much am I going to get paid? How do you settle on a what you think your value is?
If I'm not really compelled by the music, I'm really expensive. If I am compelled by the music and what their artist is trying to accomplish, I have some leeway in terms of what rate I can charge. So I kind of have it like most folks, there's your label budget tier, your indie label budget tier, your totally indie artist tier. But when I get to the totally indie artist tier, a lot of times my rate that I get paid, I have to factor in just how much I want to work on this project. Because a lot of times there's stuff I really want to be a part of. So I'm going to leave money on the table, just to be sure that I get the job and then I'm able to get the artist to where they want to be at the end of the process without having to worry too much about killing them on the price. Is that what they teach you at MBA school? Probably not, because I didn't go there, so I don't know. But I was pulled to this stuff, like I said, at an early age because it moves me, and that's more valuable than money sometimes.
So
my wife's not going to see this, right?
No, I blocked her from it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. The record industry is so different now than it was when I think either one of us got in.
Yep.
I mean, when I got in let's say late 80s, early 90s model, very different. Expectations were different. Technology was different, et cetera. An independent band can make a great living if they treat it like a small business, and signing a major record label deal in this day and age seems ludicrous to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So are there things that you do to think asymmetrically and work, in a way that is counter to what we've always done?
Talking to folks who worked through those years in the music industry, whatever role it was, a lot of them are angry and bitter and wish things could go back to the way they were. And they never will, first of all, but also coming from that sort of independent mindset from the beginning, I was never looking for label deals. Mm-hmm. We were running away from them already. I think you're right. You have to think about, okay, it's sort of the Wild West now. What is beneficial? Like, what is beneficial to an artist? And you just hit the nail on the head. It's a small business. And if you start thinking about it that way right away, and also you have to think about touring right away. A lot of people wait around to be discovered, or wait around until they have the money to go on the road, and wait around and wait around and wait around and get nowhere. And really the job, especially if you want to grow in the absence of label money pouring down on you, if you want to grow your career and grow your fan base, you got to go make music in front of people. And that includes whether you're a DJ or a metal band, and everybody in between, is you need to connect with audiences. And there's a reliance on social media to make that happen quickly. The reach of social media is astounding. I've seen a couple examples where there's a viral moment that leads to a large record deal or a publishing deal, and then they find out later, well, that was the only song that person had. That's, the rest of their songs just aren't nearly of the same level. But there was no investigation of the art. They were just looking at the numbers. What's their reach? And if you can combine substance with a viral video, now you're onto something. So a lot of times I'm talking to the artists I'm working with, and they're all doing TikTok and Instagram and constantly feeding that algorithm. But I say, take a step back, and first of all, is your job content creator or is it musician? Put your focus on the one that is your actual career you want. 2, be thoughtful about what you're putting on social media. Do we care about your breakfast? Probably not. But don't do it just because you're supposed to post X times a week or whatever. So start thinking about what you can do to actually be building an audience rather than just kind of flinging out stuff and hoping it sticks. I think, like I said, if you combine the two things to where you're actually building a music career, and then you're using social media to amplify it rather than trying to use social media to get people's attention so that you can have a career, is entirely backwards. And that's actually kind of old-fashioned. That goes back to the let's put on a show, kids. But it works, and it works over and over again. And I always talk about these artists that I love whose names I didn't know 5 years ago, like Billy Strings, Sarah Farrell, Charlie Crockett. I've been to see those guys live, half a dozen times each. And I literally didn't know their name or their music 5-6 years ago. So it can happen, and it does. And these people build viable careers doing just what I described, is playing in front of people, really striving to make timeless art, and using the technology tools that we have to spread the art, not the content.
Spread the art, not the content. That's really well said, Ed. Well, everything you mentioned is artist-centric, and I think that's brilliant. How does that asymmetrical thinking pertain to you? Do you try to think outside traditional thinking in that way for how you present your services?
I'm incredibly bad at marketing myself. And I know I'm not alone. So like I said, most of my work comes from doing good work before. And so I need to make sure that I don't lose sight of that and keep doing the best work I can. In theory, that should lead me to more and more work. Of course, every once in a while, I look at my calendar and go, uh-oh.
As we all do.
Yeah. And then back to another point, too, that you made earlier about focusing on one thing. As that word of mouth is spread about working with me, it has led to this just sort of constant stream of roots music and Americana. I mean, some of it's straight country, but most of it fits into that little bit vague roots kind of box. So for me, we, at the end of last year, redid the website, redid the business cards, did the rebrand, but just went all in on it. Like, hey, this is what I do first. And I think it's what I do best. So being able to say, this is, you show up, you might need to wear a cowboy hat here because that's where the music's headed. And that's been helpful to me to be able to, instead of, again, flailing around trying to get any gig I can get. It's not that I can't record a hip hop track or mix it, but I'm probably not your first choice. So why not be your first choice for something I am really good at? So that's my, again, not MBA school marketing approach. Do good work, hope people hear about it. Could I be more effective? Probably. But defining what I do in a specific way, I think helps a lot.
I keep coming around and revisiting the business models of Steve Albini and Discord Records, Ian McCoury and Fugazi and the whole DC hardcore scene.
Again, huge inspirations. Like I said, even, I don't know that I've listened to an entire Fugazi album ever. And I think I survived one show that was only $5.
Right.
But like that independent DIY spirit of of how those guys approach things was a huge inspiration.
And I think I keep gravitating towards that because I think that was working. It worked for Steve until unfortunately he died, but operating outside of the mainstream is not a bad thing. I look back at that and I think, God, all those people involved in all of that were brilliant. Of course, Don Zientara, who recorded most of, Fugazi, Bad Brains, Minor Threat, all those
DC
bands.
thing. Yeah.
The whole DC thing. I mean, just the way Don operates today, I find very inspirational. And deals with the local community. Don's not like on Instagram trying to reach out to, bands in Italy.
Right. Yeah, me neither. So, though there is a guy, I think he's Swedish, called Harmonica Sam that I'd really like to work with.
So if he's listening, Harmonica Sam,
yeah,
please come calling.
But yeah, no, that independent mindset was kind of where I started and kind of where I wound back up at. And I'm not comparing myself to Steve Albini or Ian McCoury or any of those guys. I'm just saying that I was inspired by the way that they approach things.
Yeah, I still keep coming back to it to this day. They still influence me and get me, critically thinking about what it is I'm doing and how I'm doing it. So that's why I bring it up.
Yeah. And I know like Albini had a lot of sort of philosophical thoughts about being a producer and how you get paid and not taking points. And it's not so much that stuff that grabbed my imagination. It was just like you said, operating outside the mainstream and still being able to do something sustainable. Like, how do you do that? That's what that's what I'm trying to do here. And it's certainly what I have been striving to do for a long time now.
In terms of those that have influenced you directly, mentors, is there anybody in particular that's fresh on your mind that you think about to this day that helped out?
Yeah, not directly necessarily in the sort of hands-on engineering stuff. There were, and I wish I probably can't come up with names off the top of my head, but those early, like I said, first time in the studio, got really interested and did everything I could to get back into a studio and just kind of sit around and watch what was going on and help out and learn. And all the people for all those years who had the patience for me to do that and just be this like annoying kid, like, what's that button do? Why did you push that? I've just got gratitude for their patience is huge. Yeah, I don't know that I personally have that patience. Even though I think it's important to pass things down to the next generation, sometimes you just got to get work done. So for that dozen or so folks who let me just kind of look over their shoulders, whether they were official mentors or just the people that I annoyed, my debt to them is huge. On the other, sort of broader side of things, I worked with, and I'm not trying to name drop, but I worked with Willie Nelson for a little while and got to spend time and see how tight-knit his team was, from the roadies to the guys in the band to everybody involved. And they were that way because of how he treated them. And he treated them like they were family and brothers, not employees. And so to be able to approach people with respect and humor and accept them for who they are and understand who they are, that was a kind of a big, huge life lesson. It's not about being the boss. It's about being, it's almost more like being the dad and being patient with people. And that was really like, and again, it's not like he sat me down and said like, here's how you do it, man. I just watched and saw, because the loyalty to each other in that organization was huge. And I thought, well, how do you do that? And I think it's just mutual respect.
I spoke with Mauer Applebaum, and he had an interesting thing. We were talking about mainstream artists versus independent artists. And he said, well, don't forget, some of the independent artists we have today were once major artists, and, now they're independent. And
Yep.
in some respects, someone like Willie, he's had his mainstream success. He doesn't need a major label necessarily. And he can operate an independent operation. I'm sure that there's numerous bands like that.
Well, who comes to mind immediately is Iron Maiden and Metallica.
Yeah, or Pearl Jam.
Pearl Jam. Yeah, there you go. Would they have the ability to have these continuing careers without that mainstream success? Probably not, because they just wouldn't have the fan base. But the fact that they, at this point in their lives, can just go, we're going to just do it on our own. The Iron Maiden, I forget the manager's name, but somebody asked him about the music business. He said, I'm not in the music business. I'm in the Iron Maiden business.
I know. I heard that quote. I love that.
And I was like, that sums it all up right there. He's not worried about trends and fads and TikTok.
Yeah, they're back. That goes back to what we were saying about small businesses.
Yeah.
He's in the small business of Iron Maiden.
Yep. With their own jet.
With their own jet, right. Yeah, and I was just reading the other day about Metallica having their own record pressing plant.
Yeah. Yeah. So I worked on a tour that Metallica did across Europe. And I forget the name of the tour, but it was basically the big four thrash metal and then a whole host of other metal bands. And they would do a run of like 12 to 15 shows across Europe, and there were 1 or 2 day festivals, 80,000 people. And the revenue that Metallica makes from selling black t-shirts is something like $1 million a night. That's just astounding to me.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
But they're in the Metallica business, and guess what? It sells a lot of t-shirts.
Yeah, actually, gift I got for my birthday from my family was this book, Metallica, all the songs, the story behind every track, which it's fascinating. And it just reminds me to just remind everybody else that, all of us audio professionals that are dealing in music, not necessarily, it doesn't matter what industry you're in terms of audio, but you got to remember who our customer is. And I think, I don't know if you noticed this, Ed, but I think that there's a whole separate industry of catering to ourselves as audio professionals. We're being sold to by other, in some respects, working class audio. I'm selling that to, not literally because it's free, but
right.
That's a pitch to my fellow audio professionals, and that's one form of it. But all those subscription services that you can buy to learn new techniques and ideas, that's something. But what I try to do for myself on my Instagram account is I work the algorithm. I try not to follow other audio engineers with my personal Instagram account. I try to follow bands, and I know I'm doing it right when all the ads I get are for bands. All the sponsored ads are bands, paying for Instagram ads, and I just get hit with so many great bands.
No, I've done the same thing. I made it a very conscious decision not to follow gear manufacturers.
Mm-hmm.
Because even though they might post something interesting to me, ultimately they're taking money from me, not giving money to me. And so I follow artists. I follow artists that I find interesting, or if there's somebody that I respect and they follow someone else, I may jump on the bandwagon just to see what it's about. And yeah, everything that comes back is, guess who's on tour? Like I get a lot of buy tickets now ads, or just dropped on Spotify or pre-save. So that I did the same curation that you did.
Part of it's a bit of an influence of the book Essentialism that I've been obsessing over, and it's all about what's really important. And what's really important to me as an audio professional are my clients and those that I work with. So I need to put the focus on them. Whereas working class audio follows gear manufacturers and other engineers and studios. And
of course,
So so if I unfollow any of you out there with my Matt Boudreau account, please don't be offended. Just know that I'm probably following you with Working Class Audio. So
Yep.
That's my point. Well, before we go, let's touch a little bit on something we have in common other than general audio. That is Atmos. How's it going for you?
Pretty slow these days.
Okay.
I had a bunch of work at the beginning of this year, and then it sort of like dropped off the face of the earth. Some of that goes back to the budget discussion that we were having earlier. But some of it just seems to be a lack of interest from the artists. And you mentioned, as audio professionals, we kind of talk to each other and cater to each other and pitch each other. And Atmos, for folks like us who especially can sit in a great sounding room, it's a really, really amazing way to listen to music, to experience music. One of the artists that I was in and played her something, and she said, "It feels like I'm listening with my whole body, not my ears." And it was Spider who was at PMC when I first got here. He kept trying to drag me in there and get me to listen to it, and I 5.1 surround, whatever. And I've heard it, done it. And then one day somebody was in there working on a mariachi record. And I walked in and was kind of standing there during playback and started to get chills. And, they hit stop and I was like, what's happening to me? Why do I feel like this? And it was because this is the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard in my life. And that was it. I was hooked right then.
Yeah.
I've got a release next week coming out that's instrumental outtakes from a double album that came out in September. On the album, these instrumental interludes sound like they're coming from an old movie projector from the 1920s. But we recorded them, like it's a little chamber ensemble. We recorded them, full res. So I mixed those in Atmos and stereo. So we're going to put out the sound design version, the stereo mix, and then the Atmos mixes. And I'm actually really proud of this stuff because the music's really cool. It's like I'm sure I owe the estate of Ennio Morricone any royalties that come in because it's pretty spaghetti and it's pretty Western. But that's been, in the last 5 or 6 months, that's been the only Atmos project that I've worked on. So I'm hoping that this is just a momentary lull for me anyway, and that people do really get on board. I think that presenting it to artists as a way to be creative and create a deeper emotional connection to their fans might help. And I don't know that we've done a great job as an industry doing that.
I'm heading into my 4th year of it pretty soon, or I'm going to hit upon 4 years of it. And my strategy of doing stereo and Atmos mixes at the same time has been successful. That seems to work really well. But what I feel is my job is from this side of the glass is to educate the artist on what the economic opportunities are, because I don't think a lot of artists know what immersiveaudioalbum.com is. And
right.
I try to hip them to that and show them, okay, look, let me take you to the website, look at the prices of these albums. There are people that are downloading these, and essentially, an argument could be made to say, oh yeah, those are all audio files. Well, those audio files spend money.
Absolutely.
And they are, if you want an analogy of something else in the world, they are like people with inkjet printers, and you are the ink for their inkjet printer, and they need to buy ink. It's kind of a strange one, but so I show them that, I introduce them to that concept, and then they sign up, and then it starts to work out. But I'm also trying to point them to the concept of the possibility that we could make dedicated binaural mixes out of the Atmos that are just, like printed as binaural mixes and advertised as binaural mixes for Bandcamp. So that
So that's funny that you say that, because I had the same thought, but was for YouTube. Because I know a lot of music is consumed through YouTube, and I said, well, here's a place that you could put it. Doesn't necessarily have to be a music video, but it's a way that you could deliver this experience to somebody who doesn't have Apple Music in particular.
And I don't know what the status is of the Samsung and Google collaboration on a open source version, their version of a surround technology. I think where it's going to potentially change is if they do something and it hits YouTube. And if they do, that could potentially be a game changer for surround and or binaural in general.
Yeah, my understanding was that sometime before the end of 2024, there was going to be a preliminary tool set or some sort of plugin available through Avid for Pro Tools for that format. But I haven't seen or heard anything announcing that yet.
God, if that happens.
And that's even with the latest update of Pro Tools, the 2024 12 or whatever it was. I didn't see it in there.
Well, I will say that it's been working for me, Atmos. And if it progresses and morphs into something beyond that with Google and Samsung, but they're still at the core of the Atmos concept, I'm still on board. I'm with you. It's a great way to experience music, and in headphones, if done right, can be truly amazing, not only in the musical front, but the theatrical front from what Audible's doing with.
Yeah, there's some folks who they've come in a couple times to do some just playback, and they're doing these sort of immersive audiobooks where it's voice actors, it's sound design, and it's really cool.
Yeah, that's what cool. I'm referring to with Audible.
Yeah.
They're doing that with some key titles like 1984 and other things.
Yeah, this was a original script, and I don't know if I can't remember if they initially were going to make a podcast or just a long form thing, but they've hosted sort of like a silent disco experience where they have 20 or 30 folks and all give them headphones and they listen to it together. So you're getting this sort of real-time reaction with other people who are experiencing the story, and the bullet just flew by. So, but that was an interesting approach to make it not just a thing you download to your phone, but a social component that is a shared experience, kind of like a book club or something. But thought that was really cool that was a key part of what they wanted to do, was have these events where people would experience it in real time together. More practical to do the binaural headphone distribution than to try to set up a multi-speaker array and have everybody in the sweet spot. And, you could just kind of give them headphones and sit them down in the room.
Great to chat with you at length about your thoughts on things and get a better sense of where you've come from.
And I didn't mention banjos or mandolins once.
It's amazing. I'll put a link in the show notes to everything everybody needs to potentially hire you to do Atmos or production, or hire you to do pedal steel.
Absolutely. That'd be great.
All of that.
As we said, working in the indie field, I'm always looking for work. So anything that comes my way is great.
No shit. I'm there with you. Well, very good, Ed. You take care, and thanks for making time for me.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Matt. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
You got it. Talk to you later.